wanted to talk about refactoring this and writing this in a couple different ways, but we haven't yet fully passed our output, our test suite. So let's fix that first, and then we can talk about refactoring. So right here, the problem here is running with an output file. It's expecting that if I run this 12, let's say an N3 with an output file of out.txt, that it will write the file called out.txt and print nothing. And so it's not doing that right now. So let's fix that real quick. I could, for instance, create an output file handle, and I have to figure out what that's going to be. So if if args.outFile is present, then it needs to be equal to opening that out file and as a writable file handle. So I could say it's going to be equal to open args out file as a writable for writing text if there's args out file. But what is the else? I have to define that. It's going to be sys.standardout. We've used this a couple times, so hopefully that's not surprising. And so instead of printing, well, actually we can still say print. We can still say print file is going to be equal to the output file handle. And now if I run this, oops, just off a little bit, open, missing a parenthesis there. Let's try that again. Saving it and running it. Let's see, string object is not callable. Open args out file. Oh, sorry, got a little ahead of myself. There we go. Let's try that again, one more time. Just bad syntax. Okay, now I have an extra paren. Okay, let's try one more time. Now, if I cat the output file, I see that's the output that I expected, and there's nothing printed to the to standard out. If I run make test now, I would expect that I'm passing all of my tests, and I am. So now let's take a moment to talk about how to refactor this a little bit. This bit here could be more easily handled by defining this as, and I had started to do this and I kind of got sidetracked. If I change the type from string here to argparse file type as writable text. And the default here, where I made a mistake, was not defining the proper default. Default here is going to be sys.standardout. So if a output file name is given, it will be changed into a writable file handle for me. And if nothing is provided, then the default will be to use sys.standardout. Now I don't have to do any of this. I can get rid of all of this code. I'll just comment it out. And then instead of saying output file handle, I'll just talk about args.outFile. And that should work. I'm going to run my test suite again, and it does. So I was actually able to get rid of a line of code that's a little hairy, and I had a little trouble writing that. I was able to get rid of that by refactoring this into an argparse file type. So I handled that. Another thing that I'd like to do is now that I'm passing all my tests, I'd like to go back and talk about this. That was written first using a for loop. And I'll change it, and I'm going to run my test suite and make sure that works. So that works just fine. I can write it that way. I think that this is a more Pythonic way to write it, and also just makes more sense because usually we really execute for loops in order to do something like to have a side effect, like we're trying to print something. This here, we're trying to use the list comprehension because we're trying to make a new list. So if you see that you're using a for loop to make a new list, then you should really think about writing that as a list comprehension. So the other thing is that just from a lines of code aspect, this is really one line of code. So I can make this these 3 lines of code are really just this one line of code. I'm going to save that. I'm going to run my test. I'm going to still make sure it's the same code. It still works. That can be more succinctly written. If I say verses, I can use this as a map. So map wants as its first argument a function. So we've written a function. It's called verse. And then the thing that we're trying to feed in it, I don't need to say for day in. I just need something that produces a sequence. So this is an even shorter way of writing that. Let's make sure it still works. Yes, so the idea here is that the range function is going to produce the numbers 1 through 12 or 1 through 3, whatever it is. Each one of those is going to be given as the argument to verse, and then the output of that is going to be each one of those, the return values from verse is going to produce a verse, which is going to be some strings, and all that's going to go into verses. So to me, that looks really quite nice. I know this function works because I wrote it here and then I wrote a test for it. The only other thing I might talk about is how in the solution that I present here, I wrote this line here. So rather than this line here, this for loop, I decided to use lines.extend, and then I can do a list slice of GIFs up to day. So if I take, for instance, the GIFs, and let me show you this in the REPL. I can take the GIFs over here. Oh boy, I'm going to have a trouble pasting this in apparently. Oh, I think I know why. It's because I've indented that. Let me try again. Great. And let's say our day is the day that I have is 3. The way I've written this here is GIFs up to day. Let's just look at that. What does that give us? That gives us up to the 3rd day, and it's really confusing here because the day is 3, but it actually gives us the right number of days, but that's actually because the 3rd day is actually in the 2nd position, and so 3 is not included. So once you wrap your head around the off by 1 stuff, this actually works. A list, if the day is 3 and we want the first 3 GIFs, we can say GIFs up to day. The thing is that we need those in reverse. And so we've seen before that we can call the reversed function. If I call that here, it's going to give me this generator. In the REPL, I'm going to have to use list to force it to actually show me the results. Otherwise, it's going to just kind of give me a promise to eventually give me the reversed items. So that is actually the GIFs in the correct order that I want. And you see it returns a new list. And so this gets into, if we go all the way back to the picnic chapter, there's some information there about how do you add items to a list. And I specifically talked there about the extend method. And so given if our lines are, let's say our lines are equal to on the, actually, so this will be the 3rd day of Christmas, and I'm going to skip the 2nd line. So that's the first line. So given lines of that, we want to extend it. So if I say lines dot append this value here, and let me just say a reverse GIF day. So if I say I want to append that, what do I get? Let's see, I must be missing a parenthesis. So if I say what is lines, then it's on the 3rd day of Christmas and then this iterator object. Okay, well that's annoying. Let's go back and just try to fix this. So that's our lines. And then, okay, let's say we want to, we'll force this here into a list. And now I'll say what is lines? Well, it's maybe a little difficult to see here, but it's actually, if I say what is the length of lines, it's actually 2. Because there's this element here is a string, and then the second element is another list. So if you append a list onto a list, it actually appends the list and not the contents of the list. That's not what we want. So let me go back and change lines back to this. And what we want here is we're just using the wrong method. We want the extend method. So this will actually take the contents of the list that we're giving and append those to our list. And here I don't even need to say list. Now if I look at lines, I see it has all of the individual lines. That's what I want. So that's what's going on here, lines.extend, and then I can reverse the GIFs of the day. It's Maybe a fairly clever way to write this. This is a longer way to write it out, but this is pretty elegant. I really like the fact that I can slice into that, reverse it, and then extend this lines by that. So that is the solution that I wrote for 12 Days of Christmas. I hope you learned something from that, and we'll keep going.